Good morning, fourth grade. Today we are going to continue reading in our American Revolution text, and we're going to be focusing on what life was like on the battlefield. So in your book, you can turn to pages 28 and 29. And before we get started, we have a quick write. It says, do you think Continental soldiers in the American Revolution had a difficult or easy time during war? Why do you think this? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for the focus question. It says, how did Washington's troops experience success in the battlefield? Our vocabulary words are evacuate, and that's when you leave a place because it's not safe, so you evacuate. Expedition is a journey or a voyage that a group of people go on. And retreat is specifically talking about an army when they run away from the enemy because they've been defeated. And so they want to run away before they're captured or killed. All right. So before we begin reading, we're going to create a how or why question about the title, so that we can find our main idea, because this is a nonfiction text. So I turned on the battlefield into this how question. Get ready to write. How did Washington's troops experience success on the battlefield? Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready to read. And we'll begin reading at the top of the page where it says after. After evacuating Boston in the spring of 1776, the British under Howe sent a small expedition to Charleston, South Carolina, but it was driven back. Next, he invaded New York to defeat Washington's army, who retreated ultimately to Pennsylvania, and it seemed Pennsylvania would also soon fall to the British. But on Christmas Eve, Washington counterattacked, defeating German troops at Trenton, and a few days later he triumphed over the British force at Princeton. The Patriot Army marched to the New Jersey hills where it would remain for the winter. Washington was striking back. All right, and so when I'm thinking about how Washington experienced success, I would talk about how, after he was defeated in Pennsylvania, he counterattacked the German troops at Trenton and Princeton, which is where he was, that's where he was able to win. So for our main idea, we would say, after a defeat by the British in Pennsylvania, Washington and his troops defeated the Germans at Trenton and the British at Princeton. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 2A. It says, how did Howe experience defeat? So we'll need to go back in the text where Howe lost a battle. And so we know in this first part that he evacuated Boston, so that's a defeat. And then he went to Charleston, South Carolina, and he was driven back, so that's another defeat. All right, and so in box 2A, we would say, Howe experienced defeat when the British Army was forced to leave Boston, and when he tried to attack Charleston, South Carolina, and lost. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 2B. It says, how did Howe respond to these defeats? And so we're thinking about, what did he do after he lost in South Carolina? And it says, next he invaded New York to defeat Washington's army, who retreated ultimately to Pennsylvania. Okay, so Howe did not give up. Instead, he marched his army up to New York, where he was able to win. And so in 2B, we would write, Howe responded by invading New York and forcing Washington's army to retreat. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 3A. It says, how did Washington respond to the defeats at New York and Philadelphia? So let's go back in our text where it says, next he invaded New York to defeat Washington's army, who ultimately retreated to Pennsylvania, and it seemed Philadelphia would soon fall to the British. So this is the part in the text that our question's talking about. How did Washington respond to these two defeats? And we will read the next sentence to figure out what he did. It says, but on Christmas Eve, Washington counterattacked, defeating German troops at Trenton, and a few days later he triumphed over the British force at Princeton. All right, and so we know that Washington did not give up. Instead, he led two successful attacks in a row, one at Trenton and one in Princeton. And so in 3A, we would write, Washington responded by planning counterattacks in Trenton and Princeton, which he won. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for 3B. It says, what is the author's perspective of Washington's army? And I'm going to go to this last sentence to try to figure out what the author's opinion or perspective is about Washington's army. And in the last sentence it says, Washington was striking back. This makes me believe that the author has confidence in Washington. This sentence is positive. It leads the reader to believe that Washington will continue to be successful. So in box 3B, we would write, the author is confident in Washington's ability to lead the Continental Army because he states Washington was striking back. Press pause to write down your answer and play when you're ready for box 4. It asks us, what is the structure of the text? Okay, and when I want you to pull out your text structure foldable in your homeschool journal, and we're going to kind of go through each one of these one by one to try to figure out what the structure of the text is. I know when I'm looking at it that, Hal loses, and then, he strikes back and wins, and Washington loses, and he responds by, planning another attack and winning. And so things are happening, and the generals are responding to what happens. Okay, and you would be tempted to do problem and solution. A problem would be that they lost, and then they solved it by fighting another battle and winning. But that's not our best answer because the war is not over. Okay, so then we'll go to cause and effect. And cause is, why something happened, and the effect is what happened. And as you can see, we have several events. Hal lost in Boston, Hal lost in South Carolina, Washington lost in New York, Washington lost in Philadelphia, Washington won in Trenton, Washington won in Princeton. And so these are events, and they also explain why these people did what they did. Hal went to South Carolina because he lost in Boston. Hal went to New York because he lost in South Carolina. Washington went to Trenton because he lost in Philadelphia. Okay, so it also tells us why the generals did what they did. So not only does it tell us what happened, but it tells us why the generals did what they did. And so cause and effect seems like a very strong answer. It's not chronological because we only have, we do have a few dates. We have Christmas Eve, we have spring 1776, but those are only 2 dates, and there's a lot of details in here. So that's not our strongest answer. It's not sequenced because the author isn't telling us, how to do something, how to win a battle. He's not telling us that. And it's not compare and contrast because we don't have 2 topics where the author tells us how they're the same and how they're different. So our strongest answer is cause and effect, because the author explains how Howe and Washington responded to defeat. And the author also explains how they were successful. So press pause to write down your answer for box 4 and play when you're ready for the paragraph. And for the paragraph, it says, how did Washington's troops experience success on the battlefield? Okay, and you'll want to go to box 3 to help you answer that question.